Now, we were talking to Conor Pope yesterday, and I drew particular attention to the fact he was talking about the cost of childcare, which is scary. That if you have 2 children and you live in Dublin, it can be 2,000 a month, which is a lot of money. If you've one, it's 1,100. But if you were in Longford, I think he said 650.
Yeah, he did.
650. And I was thinking, what a nice place Longford is. You can buy a house for a quarter of the price you can get it in Dublin. So, Eoghan Corry, whom you well know, editor of Travel Extra, something is happening in Longford that kind of grew very quietly, but is going to be very beneficial for the area.
It's the equivalent, Marian, of a new town, a large town springing up in the Midlands in County Longford, and it's based out of the tourism industry. It's campsite is a very derogatory term for it. Centre Parcs, a very high-end self-catering accommodation company, and they're building close to Ballymahon, a town which is the equivalent of Ballymahon. When it was full, it's going to have 2,500 people. There are going to be 1,000 full-time jobs there, and it's going to require all that infrastructure, water, everything else that a large town has, and it's being built from scratch.
So there'll be a lot of emigration or immigration to Longford, I would think.
Long awaited, because if you were to stack the 32 counties of Ireland in terms of visitor numbers, Longford comes in at number 32. It gets about 30,000 visitors a year, 15,000 from outside the state.
What do they go to Longford for?
There's a surprising amount of things to do, but what it has is that water attraction. It's the Midland Lakeland brand that Fáilte Ireland have launched this year. Longford, there are big expectations out of that. The sort of activities that Centre Parcs are offering are the stand-up kayaking, paddle boarding, all of those things. The signature attraction really until now has been the Corley Trackway, which is the bog road, the wooden road through the bog. There's a visitor centre there. The numbers are dreadful that go to it. It's about 6,000 a year.
Right.
It wouldn't even rate in Cork or Kerry, and that's why this is such big news out of Longford. It's going to have a disproportionate impact on the local economy.
Suzanne Kelly, what were you laughing at? These are your next door neighbours, aren't they?
Why did they go to Longford? And I was going to say for the water and the water sports, because I live up the road from Ballymahon, and Ballymahon is a lovely little town actually. It's quite nicely set out because it's a broad street. But the position is that I think it's good for Longford because people pass through the Midlands. I mean,
without a doubt, yeah.
I've often invited people to Athlone and they say, I prefer to stay on the dual carriageway. To be stopped.
The great restaurateur Ray Byrne used to say that if you meet a tourist in Athlone, he's lost.
It's improved a bit.
The restored cathedral in Longford is well worth visiting. The Harry Clark windows and the art in it, it really is pretty spectacular.
It's actually number 1 on the TripAdvisor list for Longford, ahead of Corley Trackway. But
then the Centre Parcs thing enclosed as well, which is the trick, which we went on a few glorious holidays down in West Cork this year, but we ended up in Enniscrone on the worst weekend of the summer, which I think was sometime in August. Remember, it just rained and rained and rained. And that's why this could be so successful. I can't wait to see what it'll be like to be able to do your outdoor stuff, even
indoors,
if it's raining outside. That will be the key to mending the main problem with Irish holidays, I think.
Indoor attractions are our weak point. Everybody comes, they're not coming for the weather, they're not coming for that glorious sunshine you get in Portugal or Spain. But when it does come down, it can come down for 5 days. And people who are visiting often come back and say, indoor attractions, we don't have enough of them. The big infrastructure investment hasn't been made. We need 20 of what, for instance, the Guinness Storehouse is doing.
But the Guinness Storehouse is just phenomenal.
Its numbers are quite amazing.
Yeah.
It's galloping on past 1.5 million visitors a year. It's easily our number 1.
Extraordinary. Anyway, can I come back to the main event here? You understand that contracts have been signed, because spin-offs are going to be terrific, have been signed to Irish food companies to supply food for there.
We are building another Ballymahon, so everybody's going to have to be fed. All the contracting, all the repairs, everything is being done. They are working hard to keep that local. The buzzword, there's a lot of eyewash about how local your food is around the world. Everyone claims I
Just
source
out the back door,
I source the food locally, but in reality, the way the food industry is stacked up, it's very hard to do that. But they are going to source locally. It's going to contribute hugely to the local economy, right up and up across the border. Another really important aspect of this is that the Brexit threat, which nobody in tourism or nobody in any industry is quite sure how it's going to pan out, it disproportionately affects the Midlands and those counties. They have fewer tourists, and a higher proportion of their tourists come from either Northern Ireland or Britain.
Fishermen, there are a lot of fishermen and women go to the Midlands.
It's quite a really interesting thing how well Longford and Westmeath and Cavan and places were doing in the 60s with the fishing, big strong fishing product. If you were to pick up an Irish brochure from way back or look at the old newsreels, they'll have a lot of the Shannon, boating on the Shannon. That end of it has fallen out the back, while we've got lots of cliffs of moher and seagulls. And
stags and hens are massive now on the Shannon. Like you can't go on a boat
and
without
other animal life. Yes,
well, yeah.
The
Carrick-on-Shannon, I think, is the stag and hen capital of Ireland.
That would be pushing it a little bit, but it proportionally,
maybe not after
You've just destroyed them now.
Proportionally, they have done. You know what they're doing is they're pitching in their hotel offering at a slightly lower price, They're also having to put little cherries on top of the cake to try and attract the level of bookings. They would depend very heavily on retired English people coming on coach tours. The Wild Atlantic Way is a little bit expensive for them. They come at the time of the year when it's a bit cheaper. That's where Leitrim, Longford, places like that have been picking it up. They haven't been picking up enough of it. When something big arrives, it creates a lot of noise as well, and people are sitting up taking notice of Longford, where before it was the equivalent of the flyover state in Ireland is what the drive through at 50 kilometres an hour.
And it's set in a forest, is it?
That's it. It's Quilta property. This would have raised environmental hassles as well. But Centre Parcs' reputation across Europe, they've quite a big presence in Britain, and because we get so much English-speaking media here, we tend to be very aware of that. But they are a Dutch, effectively came out of the Netherlands, and their reputation through Europe is in dealing with fragile environments or wooded environments or environments where there is plant life to be protected, has been very, very thorough. And while people would say you can't go into a forest and build something of this size without damaging it, Quilta were very quick to check out their credentials and to do everything they could to accommodate them, because the economic benefit of the forest versus the economic benefit of what's coming do not compare.
Right. Mr. Climate Change over here mightn't be very pleased with that.
No, it sounds to me like a sustainable project. I think Longford, it's interesting, I think at the 2016 census there was actually immigration into Longford, that Longford actually, people may laugh at it, but actually it's looking like it's a cheap place to live, and there are reasons for locating other business. You wouldn't live on tourism alone, you need other business.
But during the boom, if you bought a house in Longford, half of it was paid for by tax.
Yeah.
So, you could actually buy half a house with the taxpayers' public monies in Longford during the boom.
And we ended up
How
with
did that work?
You got an incentive to buy it. You got 50%.
And we ended up with a lot of uninhabited developments that caused huge problems. They were outside of small towns. You'd have a development which...
they were over heavy.
It was a tax incentive to try and repopulate, and like all well-meaning tax incentives, ended up getting
too far.
Well, our other people, unintended consequences. Now, you say that there will be 1,000 jobs. I mean, that's like we read in the news when there's
that's an intel
Google or somebody does something amazing. And you say they will be full-time jobs?
It'll be largely there will be a big seasonal aspect to this, but there will be full-time jobs. There will also be jobs right across the spectrum, because hospitality jobs tend to be minimum wage. The restaurant and hotel industry has a reputation for employing people at very low wages. There are also huge concentration on activities, the falconry, the archery, designated activities in different age groups. That's what these guys do. They've done huge research into what families are looking for and requiring, and you're effectively getting a theme park. It's not, people will have memories of campsites, but the best of the European campsites are theme parks with all sorts of slides and zip lines and all of those sort of things. So that means there's activity-based employment as well. That's young adventure sport type of people, active sports people, getting jobs which didn't exist in Ireland 20 years ago. There's quite a few of them around now, but nothing like the scale of mainland Europe. And that is the sort of employment it's created. It's going to be very healthy, because the type of people you're bringing into Longford to work in it is across such a wide range. And not just the standard. The service industry, as I say, has a bit of a name for just a lot of waiters, but this is going to be such a range of 1,000 jobs. Part of the problem, Marian, is that this happens quite frequently in tourism. It was an issue in the 9% VAT rate. The number of jobs created by tourism is quite enormous. It's disproportionate because
it's a bit seasonal, though, isn't it?
It can be immensely seasonal, and it can be in the most awkward places for people to notice. It's very far away from the RTE cameras down the west and the south. When you get somebody like Centre Parcs saying we're going to create 1,000 of them, it does sound like a big IDA project, and it gets people to sit up. But the argument I would make is this has been happening in Kerry, Clare, Mayo, all through the last 10 years. The biggest creator of jobs through the recessionary period, and we come out of it now, has been the tourism industry. But because it's dissipated in so many different ways, we don't realise how important it is, not just in the jobs being created first up, but the variety of jobs and the new skills and the new skill sets being brought into rural Ireland. It takes Centre Parcs to come and say, we're doing 1,000 of them in one plop for everyone to sit up and notice. But I'd also point to everyone else who's been doing this without the same kudos or without even the same notice.
Right, or probably without the same number of jobs either.
Overall, the same number of jobs, but it's in smaller.
Out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, spread out. And is it very expensive? Are they? You said it would be an insult to call them a campsite. A mobile home site?
Mobile homes, listeners will be quite familiar with what happens when you go with the French camping experience over the last 20 years, where first of all it was a lot of canvas, then the canvas retreated, and then it became mobile homes, and then it became air-conditioned mobile homes.
Yeah.
The little pool got water slides, the zip lines started coming in. We're coming in at a finished product, a very evolved product here. It won't be cheap and cheerful, and you also won't be sleeping in the tent with the leak right over your head.
Chalets, isn't it? They seem like wooden kind of.
Chalets is a phrase, that would have come from a previous decade, and some of them used to describe themselves as a chalet experience. But it's self-catering, and there are villas. Is one of some of the units are referred to as villas, and that tourism speak is full of little messages that words that gain meaning.
It's actually just a house.
Villa. Villa. It's not going to be in Tuscany. It's going to be in Ballymahan, but they call it a villa.
Now, just before we leave it, do you think the VAT change will bother the tourism, destroy it, as they're saying?
Destroy it is too strong a word, but it was the Holy Grail. They had held it up as something that they had, they were proud of the jobs they delivered, and they were holding it up and did expect it not to be changed. The report that Pascal Donoghue commissioned since last year was quite forthright in saying that the jobs created could have been created by other factors, and that the 9% was disproportionately helping better off people. So there were a load of negatives in that report. So it was quite clear which direction this was going long before the budget. I don't think people, what the real damage will be people who were expanding, planning to expand, the Brexit coming down the line, the 9%, it's created uncertainty in an industry which suffers from body blows like the foot and mouth or the ash cloud or something like that.
Or no water.
It's used to setbacks like this, and they're just seeing this as a self-inflicted one. The extra staff won't be employed, that would have been employed for next year. The extension won't be built. The carpet won't be. It's going to have those little impacts. And the other really important is it's in this. The message has gone out to the rest of the world that we are now looking at taxing tourists. We're not alone in that. A lot of economies look at tourists as fair game for taking a few bob off, but that'll affect two things. It'll affect the decisions of individual tourists when they're looking at what countries they visit. They won't really notice probably the VAT increase, but the fact it's in there makes them think like that. And the second people who notice it are the airlines. And airlines can turn off access to your island on and off like a tap. We saw it during the recession. The government tax caused airlines to cancel routes. We've seen a great expansion. We've 17 new routes this week. The announcement of 17 new routes for 2019 this week. So everything is growing, going in the right direction. Something like the 9% VAT will cause airlines to sit back and say, where are we placing our aircraft? Is it to an economy which favours tourism or not? We're not quite in that sector yet, but it does send out a really worrying message, and it has put the industry, the tourism industry, already had the frighteners put on it by Brexit. This has certainly intensified and amplified those frighteners.
Jerry?
Yeah, it's caused a lot of consternation in Kerry, obviously, this week, and a lot of coverage and a lot of political wranglings over it as well. But I think part of the problem wasn't, I've read the reports that everyone's talking about, and very strong arguments made. Look, this has done its job. It's a big, hefty allowance. €500 million they're saying they'll collect next year from it, and we have to spread it around elsewhere, is the argument from the government. But the problem is that for a lot of the businesses, this was only ever meant to be temporary. And because it went on so long, and there was an argument that it should have been perhaps maybe stopped 2 years ago, I'd imagine a good lot of businesses, restaurants or hotels, especially new ones that have started up or people who've started employing more over the last 5-6 years, have priced this in to doing business. Right. It's priced into their profit, and there'll be a price shock or a profit shock for them in the next year.
And worse than that, they've sold the holidays on those prices.
For a year and a half out.
For a year and a half, so they cannot push up those prices.
But wasn't that funded originally by taking money from people who had saved for their pensions? Wasn't that what Michael Noonan did?
Originally. And the other point about it is that it's uneven. Like I hear people saying, well, really they wanted to bring back the VAT for the Dublin hotels and the Dublin situation, and that it was different in the country. But I suppose the way to deal with that may be not through VAT. It might be to come along and look at these border counties that are more affected by tourism and the Brexit, and maybe go in and give them some incentive peculiar to their needs.
Right. Well,
so the wipe out of the VAT doesn't necessarily...
But, everybody knew that they were in a lot of difficulty with the crash, without a doubt. And people talk about prices having gone up in Dublin, and a hotel room in Dublin on certain nights is an absolute nightmare of a cost. But things have got very expensive in rural Ireland as well. I'm talking about going in for meals if you have kids, or if they're, like, it's not cheapo.
In the argument at the time was people will bring down their prices, and the minister said, well, if you bring down your price and pull them down, then you can have it. But actually the prices have gone right back up. And the other thing is that the government has to raise money somewhere. And yes, there will be some jobs lost, although I think it's greatly exaggerated, certainly based on the research done by the Department of Finance. But if you impose a tax somewhere else, you will have the same negative effects elsewhere. So certainly, if you read the research evidence by the department, I think this was the right thing to do and the right time to do it.
Okay.
And on the temporary, corporate tax rate was a temporary measure. When does it stop becoming 7 years? I know the Department of Finance officials were trying to prevent it becoming permanent, but it does. Your entire industry, for the only memory of a lot of business owners, is at this rate. Yeah. We have ended up. I mean, people have. Before I joined the conversation, you were talking about how it was a lot. It was not really a tax budget, but the only industry that has been heavily hit to the tune that I don't believe it'll be 460 million, by the way, because the expenditure comes down when tax goes up. But revenue is full of things that have gone wrong. But the only industry that's been asked to pay for all the budgetary increases is the hospitality industry. They're running around very wounded at the moment.
Right. Okay, well, let them cheer up about Longford, because they can go and have 3 or 4 kids there and still work in a good job. Anyway, we leave it there. Eoghan Corry, editor of Travel Extra, thank you very much indeed.
Podcast The Marian Finucane Show at rte.ie/radio.